if we're kind of separating the personal from the universal, it seems like the universal thing to me is the feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the personal is just like the additional, again, like sort of situatedness that embeds you in a different experience than your own.
It's really helpful, I think, because when I think about what would a general expression then of wanting to get out of my town be, it'd be like somebody saying, I'm really tired of living in this town and I'd like to get out.
That wouldn't be a good song.
Exactly. And it doesn't allow me to situate myself, to use your term, in that moment. Whereas the name of the town, the way the street looked, the cardboard-filled windows along the road, the gray smokestacks of the New Jersey skyline. I'm making stuff up.
Sure.
All that. Suddenly
Not too far from the truth, though.
Yeah, I know. Well, we've got a
yeah, I'm from New Jersey.
A Jerseyite here. So, but I'm just picking random stuff from songs he's done, and that does enable me to be in that moment, which then enables me to touch those feelings that are mine. Welcome to the Embracing Mystery podcast. Join us as we explore together ways that we can embrace creative and spiritual mystery in our lives and simultaneously find ourselves embraced in the mystery of compassionate, creative interconnection, held by what may be called the divine or source or consciousness or even mystery itself. In the process, we seek to become more fully ourselves, find our home and places of belonging, and grow as creative, spiritual, and relational beings. Well, the title that we've given for this episode of Embracing Mystery is Creativity More Than Self-Expression? And we'll get to that in a few moments, and I'll say more by way of introduction. But as always, we're going to pause at the beginning to get ourselves collected and ready to listen to one another and to ourselves. And Naz will be leading us in a reflection today.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to read a quote from Audre Lorde, who was a professor, feminist theorist, social justice activist, lesbian, poet, who was also a librarian for some time. And I'm going to share a quote from one of her essays collected in the book, Sister Outsider. So I'll read the quote, and then we'll take a minute to pause and reflect.
Great.
We must recognize and nurture the creative parts of each other without always understanding what will be created. And I'll say it again. We must recognize and nurture the creative parts of each other without always understanding what will be created. Now we'll take a moment to pause. All right, so after taking a moment to pause, we'll come back to the present moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, is creativity more than self-expression? And in many ways, the simple answer to that is, well, yes, duh. In fact, even the quote that we just heard, and that wasn't planned, suggests some one anothering in the creative process, as well as the mystery of not knowing what's going to be the result of that. And in addition to that, we recognize there's certainly communal and public forms of art, and art that's connected intentionally to perhaps wider social movements, for example, protest poems, music, film, that sort of thing, or drawing on some wider aspect of a collective consciousness or subconsciousness. And artists often talk about feeling inspired to do something and not knowing where it came from and that sort of thing. So one obvious answer is, well, yes, there is more to creativity than self-expression. And so we could just end the podcast right now and this episode and go, hang out. But there are more layers to it. And what sparked the conversation or the decision to focus on this a little bit more was in our last episode, I made a sort of broad strokes, off the cuff comment about the fact that it seemed to me that creativity and art as primarily self-expression is a really modern idea and concept. And I think I stated it in a pretty, blanket term. And that sparked some really good conversation and even feedback and pushback together, which got me thinking later, rethinking and asking myself things like, well, wait, so does that mean, Kevin, that before the modern era, it was art and creativity was never self-expression? Well, no, I don't really think that. And what do we mean when we say that something is self-expression? And so we really wanted to explore that a little bit more together in this episode. And there's complex layers to all of that, to self-expression throughout human history, understanding what self is being expressed throughout human history has changed and differed. Understanding of what self-expression is a complex and layered conversation as well. So we're going to explore that a little bit more today. And I'm going to get us started by in this way. I think most of us have heard some form of the expression that sometimes the more personal and the more self-expressive a creative piece is, whether that's a poem or a song or painting or whatever it may be, paradoxically, the more it is universal, the more people can relate to it, and the more specific it is, the more universal it can be. And yet we're probably all aware of the fact that that isn't always the case. Sometimes people create and do things that are very personal and specific that doesn't seem to have a more universal glue to it, we might say. So I wonder if we could just sort of reflect together for a few moments on what it is that might enable some personal or self-expressive art to be universal while other expressions don't seem to be. What is it about that dynamic that we might want to talk about? So I'll throw it out there and see if anybody wants to jump on that bus first, while the rest of us continue to think about it. Yeah, Raymond, please get us started.
I guess the first thing I think of is the difference between form and content. So let's say the form is something like an emotion or a feeling. So an expression of anger.
So form in that sense, not form in the sense of a form of like a poetic form or
not in terms of like a medium, but in terms of just like what is the sort of fundamental feeling, or I hate to use like essence words, but like something like that. So like an expression of joy or anger, passion. And then the content is something like, okay, what are the specific, like, concrete sensory details, the quality
of that,
the situatedness, all the kind of additional, like, adjectives and terms that you would use to describe and elaborate upon this form. And I think maybe the content in that way, or like the qualities, would really root a person or an audience member, the person who's receiving the art, in like the place where that particular person is coming from. But that's not really like the universal aspect. The universal aspect is the feeling, because we don't all okay, for example, we don't all grow up in like Freehold, New Jersey,
right?
But like, I love Bruce Springsteen. Why? Because I also wanted to get out of my town. And there's a certain, like, you're latching onto the commonality of human experience. You're not latching onto, well, I didn't
Right.
You know, I didn't grow up with that particular brand of truck, and so therefore I have no idea what you're talking about.
I was driving my Ford down the 2-lane when blah blah blah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something about the specificity of the town and maybe how he describes, and he describes a lot of towns in his songs and a lot of roads and a lot of cars in songs, as well as characters and people. Something about the specificity of that enables you to capture that more general feeling. Is that part of what you're...
Sure. Yeah. It's like, I guess it's the both-handedness of it, where like, it can concretely pull you into the particularity of someone else's experience and make it more lived in.
Right.
But I think if we're kind of separating the personal from the universal, it seems like the universal thing to me is the feeling.
Yeah.
And then the personal is just like the additional, again, like sort of situatedness that embeds you in a different experience than your own.
Yeah, which is like, and that's really helpful, I think, because when I think about what would a general expression then of wanting to get out of my town be, it'd be like somebody saying, I'm really tired of living in this town and I'd like to get out.
That wouldn't be a good song.
Exactly. And it doesn't allow me to situate myself, to use your term, in that moment. Whereas the name of the town, the way the street looked, the cardboard filled windows along the road, the gray smokestacks of the New Jersey skyline. I'm making stuff up.
Sure.
All that. Suddenly
Not too far from the truth, though.
Yeah, I know. Well, we've got a
Yeah, I'm from New
we've got
Jersey.
a Jerseyite here. So, but I'm just picking random stuff from songs he's done, and that does enable me to be in that moment, which then enables me to touch those feelings that are mine in the San Joaquin Valley of California. So that's really helpful. Yeah. Stephen, did you have more?
A question coming to mind, which is that I wonder if does the same thing work though, even when it isn't personal expression in that sense of like, if people write songs that they're not their own story.
Yep.
You do. And so, but is there something about that concreteness of painting a picture that you can actually empathize with and live in?
Right.
Because to go back to what you're saying, Raymond, that was a helpful kind of distinction. But sometimes people have form without good stuff around it, and it's just like, okay, I can tell you're angry, but it's not helping me feel cathartic and releasing my own anger. And so there's something about the craft of how you build around that form that seems to distinguish like why sometimes people can self-express and it's like, cool, that's you, buddy.
Yeah.
But not resonate in a deep way with everyone else. I think that's where I'm wondering what the difference is.
Yeah. I think that's another way of articulating it, that just generalized expression doesn't enable me to unlock.
Or is there something about honing a craft that helps you to do it in a way that draws others into imagining the boarded up windows and whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. That's helpful.
I think what I'm hearing is that maybe it's less of a binary than we think it is.
Yep. Say more on that. Yeah.
Yeah, that maybe, I think someone said it here before, the universal is within the particular. Maybe it's...
There's lots of versions of that statement. Yeah.
And maybe it's more of the generalization versus like the specifics, maybe.
Yeah.
Because we could say the sky is blue. That's obvious to everyone.
Right.
But we're all going to, I guess, to make it more... I mean, we all experience the sky is blue, but I guess if we speak English...
Unless you're in New Jersey.
That's where people are blind.
I think it's, but we all can experience that blueness differently, maybe on different days. I don't know.
Yes, that's right. And the more specific you get in, say, a poem or your visual art, Naz, about the blueness of the sky as you saw it, then the more I might be able to experience that same sky in a fresh way, and it becomes more universal because of your particularity. I think that's some of what I don't want to put words in your mouth. That's some of what I'm picking up. Yeah.
So that's the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah.
I always appreciate smashing a binary. I think I think what you're also attending to, Naz, and this is kind of weaving in something that Stephen, you also said, which is like, um, different things, the same piece of art will grab us in different ways at different times because we're also always changing. And we're bringing like each art experience is a communication. It's not like you are this static entity walking up to like a picture in a museum, and then the museum is also like the picture is also a static entity, and so like the exchange is always the same. Of course, it's not.
Yeah.
So I had this experience recently. Like the first couple of days of October, I love the weather, but I've kind of been feeling like a little off kilter. And there's certain music that I just, in those moments, I just don't feel like listening to, even if it's like a lot of my favorite music of all time, because it's just, it's a bit too heady for what I need right now.
Yeah.
And so I end up like listening to, After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. And it was like, oh, this feels like just like a well-worn jacket. I'm good in this space.
Interesting.
And that's not necessarily something I would listen to all the time.
Yeah.
So and this maybe goes back to the idea of the kind of simultaneousness of art being personal and universal, or personal and like sort of communal, is that every art experience again is an interaction between two changing living things all the time. And so, like you're saying, it's not just one or the other. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. Other thoughts on that or even your own follow-up questions for each other if you heard something that you want to.
My brain's going in a slightly different direction. So
sure.
Connecting back to the quote that Naz read to start of cultivating the creativity in one another, that said, just even when we were sitting with it, is like that fundamentally asks questions around how, like, even our personal creativity, like how is that cultivated in community by one another, where it's like, yeah, you might be expressing something, but how much of that has been shaped by, once you take down the wall of like, I'm an isolated individual, how much of this is actually influenced by your own interactions with one another in a creative community. Obviously you write your own words or paint your own paint, or maybe it's collaborative. Maybe it's not just one person, depending on the form. But I don't know. That just took me in a direction of thinking about like, how much are we claiming this is mine when like, yeah, it is and it isn't. We're influenced by all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that raises a whole question of derivative ways that all art is in some way derivative, all music, all, there's no new note necessarily, for example, or even melody line. It's probably been done somewhere before. But there are new ways of combining those things, right? And so, yeah, derivative intentionally, like in collaboration, as you mentioned, or when in the quote, helping each other, and derivative subconsciously as well. So that'd be an interesting conversation for a whole other episode at some point, like the folk nature of humanity in a way, I guess. But anyway, I'm getting us off track, and I'm supposed to be facilitating. So, but yeah, helpful. Other kind of follow-up things, or things you would want to ask each other, or before I pose a different question.
I think the follow-up has more to do with the topic that you just tabled, so I'll reserve it for
okay. Okay. But don't lose it. Don't lose it. Yeah. Yeah. Because we at the end of every episode, we encourage people to say, hey, suggest other topics and next things flowing out of this. So please don't lose that, Raymond. This, and speaking of which, I think my next question, I'm realizing as I look at it and think about our conversation right now, kind of connects to conversations we've had where, like, how do you know that you're ready to share stuff, and what if it's not meant to be shared, and what if people don't deserve to have it shared? That was a great insight I think from last time, if I'm remembering, from you, Naz, and that does connect to this in my mind. I see a thread. I hope I can articulate it between like personal, private, or not just private, personal self-expression. That if it's going to be universal, it's only going to be universal if it's shared. But not all self-expression, I think we all agreed, is either ready for that or should be. So that is circling around my question of like, well, then is all self-expression art? Is art only art when it's shared? And maybe I'm asking too ethereal a question, but I wonder if it does seem to me to connect to the thread of today a little bit. But yeah, go ahead, Raymond.
Just to kind of confirm my understanding of what you're sort of aiming at.
Well, and maybe it'll help me understand what I'm aiming at.
Yeah,
so,
fair enough.
Yeah.
So is it the idea that if we're sort of investigating the difference between art as personal or self-expression or art as universal, like you're kind of going on the related question of, is art only art when it's universal or like beyond self-expression?
That's a fair way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah. And if that can get conversation going, let's do it. Do you have a follow-up thought to that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's sort of like I'm sort of taking the trivial solution coward's way out and saying that everything is art, in the sense of like,
well, I don't think that's trivial or cowardly, by the way, but go ahead.
Fair enough. Yeah. So what I mean by that is, I mean, if you just, I think like, the root word behind art, it's like, I think it's Latin, and I think it has to do with just like a doing or like a making something.
A craft or
right.
Crafting something.
And sort of like a kind of, that is like your life from the moment that you're born to the moment that you die is I mean, whether on either side, like the free will versus determinism binary,
which we want to shatter, right?
Yeah. Either it's an infinite series of aesthetic choices, or it's a set of like sort of predetermined programs or like mechanical sort of like reactions. But either way, they're both doing something, creating something, and then it's over. And so yeah, I think that like that is art inherently, and any sort of like communal resonance or aspect of that is just like kind of it's a coalescing of multiple pieces of art to make like a bigger art form. It's kind of like a Russian nesting doll situation, if that makes sense.
Okay.
To me, anyway.
I'm wondering, I don't want to fall into a trap of trying to distinguish what good and bad art, like trying to get into definitions of like that person's art isn't real art. That like that seems like a bad direction to go. I don't want to do that. But I'm wondering, are there ways of talking about qualitatively, and it's going to be highly subjective, like things that seem to resonate with people versus things that just, I see what you're saying. Like all of art is like, there's an art of living well, and like culture making is art. It's built up of all sorts of art forms being expressed and shared communally. But are there ways that are helpful, I guess is the question I have, to talk about like stuff that is just tiresome and unhelpful and not like helping, where it doesn't seem to come from that person even authentically wrestling with their own inner world or with their own relationships or outer world in a meaningful or nuanced way. Like, I don't know how we would, what are good ways of talking about that without being like good art and bad art? Because that,
yeah.
I can jump in. I hope I won't take us too far away from the topic, but maybe sometimes it's not about the art. Maybe it is about the sharing of space around the art, just coming together.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, say more.
Well, I was thinking about a concert that I went to last night with a Bengali artist. And, there's a lot of heavy things going on in the world right now. And I think that may have been one of the first times I was in a room full of Bengali people in LA from all different backgrounds, religious backgrounds. But we were sharing joy together around the songs. And I think it was less about the songs and more about sharing space with each other in such difficult times.
Yeah. And yet would that have happened had it not been somehow positioned around the sharing of songs? Would everybody have been there or not? So there is some interface, but I'm saying this in total agreement with what you're saying about the shared space. Yeah, something anchored that, something rooted it, and yet it wasn't. What I'm hearing you say, even so, it wasn't about that. It was about the shared space.
Yeah, well,
in a way,
maybe it was both.
We're crashing binaries today, so that's right.
But I think you're right that there's this communal expression of like, my guess is it functioned in a way that invited you all into some kind of shared experience that helped to unite across many different differences of experiences, but in things you had in common as well, is my guess.
Which was language.
Yeah.
And I wonder, was there anything about what the songs were expressing and communicating that helped facilitate the sharing of space and joy?
Yes.
Because obviously if they were, deep lamenting things, it might not have done that, but maybe they were, and it still created that joy.
There was a breakup song, so.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So the shared space, even if it includes, in this case, a breakup song or, other sadder, more melancholic kind of things, can still create that community that's.
And the artist
I'm trying to phrase it as a question, and I'm not doing a great job.
And the artist was very engaged with the audience, so it wasn't just about him and his songs and just, expressing himself. He was actively participating with the audience, having people share the space with him, singing his songs with him, and then pointing people out about how they've affected him.
Yeah. So very intentional creating of a communal space by the artist. Yeah, that's powerful.
Pointing out people who have made him and got him to where he has gone to. I don't know if I'm now straying from the conversation.
No, it's very much related. Yeah.
The way I'm kind of, receiving what you're saying, and then again, kind of keeping the thread of Stephen, what you were saying about kind of talking about qualitative assessments of art in a meaningful way. I guess to me, I still kind of fall back to, it's all kind of the same, again, for lack of a better word, like nature or substance, but different sort of modes. And so for example, the way I kind of think of it from a musical standpoint is, let's say a communal gathering of artists that have had some sort of common cultural experience that is in an orchestral suite. You have a lot of different voices in the arrangement. It's doing a very specific thing. It's formalized in a certain concrete way. Contrast that with, let's say, a person making, a doodle in their bedroom. It's kind of like a single melody line. It can be crazy, it can be unadorned. It's still music. It's different forms. And then going back to what you were saying about because I think maybe the value laden bits of what you were getting at, it made me think of as a mass-produced IKEA table art. Of course it is. It is kind of, again, using this musical analogy, to me, what they would call an ostinato. It's like a repeating pattern that probably doesn't have a whole lot of melodic or rhythmic interest. You're still playing something. And the degree to which it does or does not strike you, that's just subjective and style.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's not meaningful.
Right.
But in a sense of like, that's a different conversation than from like the one of like whether or not this is art.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, this is good art that is striking me in this particular way at this particular moment for these particular reasons. But that's a different conversation.
So it's essentially expanding a much larger set of ways of talking about categories or functions and ways that are making of things what it does in the world or how we interact with it.
Yeah, and I think to me there's an important valence to why I think this way, and it's the sort of the political dimension. In other words, if you the way I kind of see things is like when I say that everything is art, that kind of like makes me. What I mean by that is that like it's all sort of like value dependent. And so what you are doing and expressing and creating at any given moment is an expression of what your values are and what you want to see in the world. And that's recursive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Secondly, even the things that you think are given are not given in the sense of like, you know, the IKEA table, like IKEA tables exist because of a certain sort of like socioeconomic structure and a certain sense of like what people value, whether it's like, you know, commodity form or expediency or efficiency or minimalism. Like when I say that the world is sort of like is artfully created all the time, like that has stakes. I think that's an important dimension that, you know, should be considered.
Yeah.
Soapbox over.
No, it's helpful. And that places even, you know, something we may not normally walk into an IKEA store and say, these tables are art, you know, but I agree.
There's a designer though, somewhere.
Yeah, there was a designer
design.
somewhere, exactly. And then there's the fools like me who buy it and have to figure out how to put it together, right? And there's less art.
There's a separate designer for the instruction manual.
I know.
Not the same designer.
Those I want to talk to.
The same designer. I don't
those
know.
are the ones I want to talk to because they're being very specific and it's not universal. But anyway, that's that's my own frustration with the instructions. But you're right. And I think, but it all lives within I'm using the word system. You used, you know, a whole different, but it lives in a very complex, you know, economic, aesthetic, sociocultural, global, communicational vortex, right? That table lives in and represents and got created for and from and why I buy it and, you know, all those things. And that is where art lives. I mean, that is... Or the whole thing is art in a way, I think is part of what you're saying, probably, Raymond.
That's right. Yeah. In the sense that it's that something is happening and it's happening for sort of specific reasons.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like in a purposeful way, you know, but just like there's a causal chain going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if at this stage I could kind of flip our original question or one of our early questions, which was exploring how and why something, the more specific something got, the more universal or general it could live in that vortex, so to speak. And I wonder if I'm going to flip it around a little bit, which is the specificity and the personal self-expression actually only that, or is its specificity actually also touching something more universal, bigger? And it gets at some of the it's another dimension of is creativity more than self-expression. Raymond, I think you hinted at some of your response to that, even from when you talked about the form and form and
Content.
Yeah. And the way you described form was probably more in this, you know, so whether it's an emotional thing or whatever it is, there's a more than me and my self expression, but my self-expression's trying to communicate my experience of that, what you called form, maybe. I don't know. But I wonder if there's more to that that we could explore. Whether it's stuff that's, we experience anyway as outside of ourselves, or consciousness, subconsciousness. It's the Embracing Mystery podcast. I'm trying to get at the mystery part of this, perhaps. And anyway, I'm meandering, so I'll open it up, see if anybody wants to grab the meander and do something with it.
I had a thought or an experiment that I want to run that came to mind that I think is related to what you're asking. So hopefully, I'm just throwing you tangents today. But
go for it.
I was like, is there any correlation between like the internal experience of creating something in the creative process versus how people receive it? And so where I'm going with that is like, there's art that you might call contemplative or mystical art. We'll put whatever adjective you want on it, but that's coming from some kind of unitive experience. Doesn't matter whether that's from some particular spiritual tradition or some particular shrooms. They have some kind of experience that is like expansive or connected in some deeper way than their normal state of being. And then you make art either in that space or trying to communicate that. Does that do something different if you're in a grounded or connected space versus like, let's say I'm making something because my mind is frazzled and chaotic and I don't feel like I'm operating out of that deeper listening space of trying to capture something and get something of that on my page. But I'm just communicating, here's my mind static. Let me put that on a page. I'm curious if there's any like correlation between the two of how people feel or what that art does.
Naz or Raymond, you guys want to take a whack at that?
I mean, I can just answer like in one word. Well, no. but I also Naz, Kevin, I also want to hear what you say before I go off on my own thing.
I want to hear more what what's behind the no, but yeah.
Oh, sure.
And I'm asking because I got a comment on another. I have a thing I've released on my own YouTube channel, and somebody commented on one of the things I'd posted there, and that was their response: no. And I wrote back like, "What? No to what? I mean, please tell me." But anyway,
well, they say
no.
They say brevity is the soul of something or other.
Of something.
I guess okay. Another sort of musical example, like one of my favorite albums of all time is this album called "Ladies and Gentlemen, We're Floating in Space" by the band Spiritualized. Love that album. I have it. And going back to what I was talking about before, depending on where I am in my own life, I'm going to experience it in a different way.
Sure.
Jason Pierce was in the throes of a heroin addiction. I'm not listening to heroin. I'm listening to my experience of the songs that he made. And, my knowledge of his story can inform the experience and change it in that way.
Right.
But I don't think that your, like the artist's mental state has that particular kind of sort of like, for lack of a better word, like sort of transcendental, like lane of communication to you.
It has more to do with how the audience is their own internal state and how they're receiving it.
It's a very, I think it's a very sort of, again, direct and highly contextual experience.
So what I wonder then, and that makes sense to me in terms of how that's primarily where it's landing. However, I'm curious about why there's particular then art forms that are used religiously to help communicate and interact in a way that I think you could choose a different art form than they do. Like thinking of like iconography or different forms of calligraphy, etc., that are used in different traditions. I'm sure they could change what they're doing and still get the same effect, but it's used in a way that helps to connect with that person in a particular pattern or path. But I could see, obviously, it wouldn't have to. Like that person, someone else could look at him like, I don't get anything from this.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is that like, so for again, going back to that album, right? So, he's a committed atheist, and I think it's a deeply kind of spiritual, religious, sort of ecstatic, feeling listening to that music. There's a lot of religious and sort of mystically minded music that does absolutely nothing for me, and that goes with other art forms as well. Yeah,
of course. Yeah. I
don't know how it is with your experiences of this sort of thing.
Naz, you want to jump in there? You got.
This is about experiences outside of ourselves. Is that
not necessarily? But my initial question is more like, how much does our own kind of creative process affect the end product, and in terms of what that does in others when they experience your work? And so he was saying it has more to do with where that person is themselves coming from, where that's going to land in their own.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
And so then I was asking, well, what about, are there particular art forms though that lend themselves to kinds of experiences if someone is, especially in a spiritual practice, trying to engage with it in a particular way? Like, are some forms more helpful than others? And it all comes back to Kevin's question, like, is there something else that people are drawing on? Or is there a more to, like, a poem that, like, maybe multiple people are trying to express something ineffable in their own concrete ways that are very contextualized to their own lives, that are personal, but are they tapping into something that's a universal experience of some sort? And that's kind of where I was trying to connect that dot of, like, is there, if there is that, then does that show up in how we create, and then how others experience what we create?
Kind of, if they're to use Raymond's term earlier about how he was using the term form, if we're all, let's say 4 poets are all trying to write a poem inspired by their connection with that same form, they're all kind of aiming at the same thing, but filtered through their own individual,
which is why there can be millions of love songs, millions of anger songs, or whatever,
breakup songs, and
actually, that brings to mind something else. Like,
go for it.
When people do commissions, because that's kind of like,
they're commissioned to do a particular piece.
Because that's not really coming, if they're being commissioned, like, how much of that is going to be informed? Like, if someone's commissioned to, like, paint a mural for an institution, and they're given parameters and guidelines and what they can or can't do, I don't know, how much of ourselves can we bring into that process? Does it slip through sometimes?
Right. And that feels like that could be a great conversation, in addition to what I've asked Raymond to remember, which I don't know what's in his mind, but I hope he remembers. We probably have some food for further episodes. We're actually getting to the point where we're going to need to wrap that up, but I don't want to lose that one either, Naz. I think, because I think we've probably all had an experience, perhaps, and listeners too, I hope, that sometimes I know when I was studying creative writing and poetry and given a very specific form, like mastering the form of the sonnet, and even given a topic that we were supposed to write a sonnet about, sometimes that specificity unleashed a creative process that wouldn't have been there without. And I wonder if sometimes commissioning can do that, and yet can it also kill it because it's being mandated to do a certain thing a certain way? I think that's an interesting question, and my guess is our answers will not be binary when we get to that. But
we'll smash it.
And so I'm gonna wrap us up here and turn it to Stephen to maybe take us out from here and remind our listeners of a few things.
Well, this was an episode that raised a lot of questions for us to explore further, so we would love to hear any questions that were coming up for you as you were listening, and that will actually shape maybe what we do next. So we'd love to hear from you, any kind of feedback around that, and make sure to like and subscribe, keep following, and we would love to have your further engagement.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks, everybody.